The May 31st El-Reno area tornado was first categorized as the F3 and based on the structural damage. Then it was changed to an EF5 based on the radar information, then officially listed as an EF3. Will you please talk about that?
Sure. So we have an index, basically, an impact scale established to measure the magnitude or infer the magnitude of a tornado based on the damage at the ground. This has been carefully researched, carefully applied across the country. And it, the engineering studies have been done to show what a wind speed would need to be to create the kinds of damage that we see, whether it's cleaning off basically damage right to the ground, right to the slab, versus structures that are standing in various states of repair after the storm passes by. You can take that standard and you can take that approach and apply it anywhere across the country. So we've adopted that, and it's a very important measure. I mean, there are all kinds of building and insurance aspects that are based upon, us applying this type of a scaling to the damage and inferring the wind speeds that existed with the tornado at the ground. Okay? So when you now introduce a new observing system and you're measuring wind speeds 500 feet above the ground, clearly that's a larger wind, and it's a larger wind speed than was inferred at the ground. Okay, there's been an inclination to say, okay, well, let's use that wind speed instead of the one that's inferred at the ground. And I resisted that for several reasons. First of all, you don't have those kind of observations across the country. Okay. Secondly, we have a very specific procedure, and it's, again, a very specific set of engineering studies that lend towards the categorization of 0 through 5 for tornado strength at the ground that we can apply nationally. So if you have some observations here or one other or two other locations, you can't apply that nationally. You can't have this uniform standard anymore. Secondly, you're changing the nature of this particular scale. So my sense is that we'll have this reviewed. There's going to be a discussion at the American Meteorological Society conference in February on this very issue. But personally, so I'm not going to make a change in that arbitrarily one way or the other. So it's a 3 based upon the review by the assessment team. They did not find a damage pattern that matched the damage that you would expect with a Cat 5 or an EF5 with the wind speeds at the ground. That has to stand that way. But we will review the procedures that if we have special observations and they want to be listed in the damage report for that particular storm, we're willing to include that observations. But until the scale itself that you can apply nationally is changed, we have to stick with what's the parameters that are in that scale and the procedures and assessment so that we have something that can be applied nationally. The other thing I would want to emphasize here, which I believe is really important, we are a science-based service organization, and our observations are used by other scientists. So if we were to change the way we use measurements to designate a tornado, a 3, 4, or 5, and it creates an increasing spike in EF5s, what happens 5, 10 years from now when climate scientists are looking to see, A, is global warming occurring, B, is it affecting extreme events, and C, oh, by the way, look at all the increase in EF5 tornadoes, this must be related to global warming, right? I can just kind of picture that kind of discussion starting to emerge. because it is an area that people look at from a scientific point of view. I want to make sure that our observational process and how it's related to categorizing these storms are done uniformly. And if there's a change, it's done judiciously with the view that what are we trying to convey, in this kind of a database.
You pretty well, I'll go ahead and read 4, but you pretty well, or 3, but you pretty well covered it, I think. My question was, with mobile Doppler radar and other weather tracking techniques, are changes needed in this rating system?
Okay, so let me deal with that explicitly. Whether, maybe changes is not the right word. Maybe there'll be other scales that are developed with those observations in mind, because they still will be better suited to measuring the winds immediately above the ground rather than right at the ground. Okay, and I believe we still need a scaling factor for the winds at the ground where people live and where buildings exist. And if codes have to be changed or new things, new ways of building houses or design in these tornado-prone areas, they can look to our data set of things that happen at the ground. It's not saying that what happens at 500 feet is not important. Okay, I mean, to understand the full dynamics of a tornado, obviously you need the entire vertical extent of it, and you need to see how it evolves. So, but perhaps what this is really pointing to is that maybe there are other scales that need to be developed that can be applied, again, hopefully nationally, to rank these tornadoes based on wind speeds above the ground. Okay, but I'm not sure I see a pathway where what's happening at 500 feet is necessarily applicable to what's happening right at the ground, where people have to make critical decisions, long-term decisions in terms of building houses, where, when, how, kind of thing.